A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the show. My name is Alex MacPhail. Thank you for joining me, and I love high performance teams. Well, today I've got a very interesting guest, a fascinating conversation about to unfold, and thank you for joining us. Captain Brad Bennetts is a global subject matter expert in his field. He heads up the upset prevention and recovery training program at South African Airways, so stay tuned. Brad, how are you doing today in lockdown? Good to see you.
Good afternoon, Alex, and good afternoon to your viewers. It's been a good time to catch up on some admin and get a lot of the logbook updates up to date. But all going well here in lockdown.
That's good. Are you managing to run around outside your house? You got a home gym? How are you keeping yourself fit and healthy?
Yeah, fortunately, my partner bought a couple of skipping ropes, so we've been doing a lot of skipping and running in the driveway. I think I managed to do about 2 kilometers a day, so it's been testing, but at least it keeps us busy for an hour.
That's good. All right, and already you got a lot of people signing in. Thanks for joining, guys. I just wanted to update you briefly. I have had some trouble with the comment sections in the last few interviews. We'll be taking your comments as well. We've got a bit of a structure to the interview. Ask all your questions, and if we haven't come up and your questions looking nice and enticing at the end of the show, we'll try and dive in and get to all those questions. But for now, Brad, let's start at the beginning. So I know as a kid you flew RC airplanes, and where did it all begin flying real airplanes for you?
Well, my family was involved in the technical side of aircraft. My grandfather was a chief technical engineer at Anglo American. So, as a kid at the age of 3 or 4, I used to hitch the odd ride in the Gulfstreams, the new Gulfstreams that they got, and the King Air. So I was always fascinated with flying, and my dad, through the same sort of pathway, got interested in aviation and did his private pilot license. So I used to fly around with him as a little kid. And then from there, it was just waiting to finish school so I could start flying. So I spent a lot of my school time flying radio-controlled airplanes and developing an interest in obviously aerobatics, because that's pretty much what you do with them.
Sure.
And as soon as I finished school, I got into the Air Force and selected for pilot training, but that was postponed for a couple of years. So during the time, I went and got a normal job and paid for my private pilot license, which then led on to the rest of my career.
Okay, so then you got going, and very soon after getting qualified as a pilot and you get a flying job, you start delving into aerobatics and real airplanes now. Now, RC, you're obviously quite familiar with aerobatics. Tell us about how your intro in aerobatics and real airplanes.
Well, I suppose it started at air shows as a kid. Watching the teams, the Chubb team and the Smirnoff team and the Winfield aerobatic team in the good old days, and being mesmerized by that kind of thing, and always just wanting to be the person in the aeroplane. It was an artistic form of flying. I saw it as such, and I saw it as a great skill to have one day as a pilot. I've always been interested in aerobatics, and as soon as I could afford to take pay for my first aerobatic lesson, that's the first thing I spent my money on.
Oh, great!
I was able to. Dennis Spence through the Smirnoff team had a school at Rand Airport, so I took my first paycheck from South Airways and paid for an hour of aerobatic flying, and I did an hour a month.
Okay.
Until such time as Dennis allowed me to ferry or to join him as a passenger while he ferried aeroplanes around.
Okay.
Got a little bit of experience there, and then Captain Scully Levine from South African Airways helped me to pursue the path of getting some more experience, and flew in the pit specials there before purchasing my own Zlin 50. And from there, it's very few opportunities to fly somebody else's airplane with no experience, especially with the considerations of insurance, etc.
Sure.
So I was able to buy my own Zlin 50, or a 50% share in it, and get going from there.
Okay, you made a couple of interesting things there. So you started on a Pitts. I mean, it's a beautiful looking airplane. People around the world know about the Pitts, but it's a tricky little airplane to really master. But getting, obviously, they have seen something in you that they allowed you to come and fly the Pitts with them and ferry across to the air shows, as you mentioned. But then building onto the next airplane, and it's perhaps a subject for another day, this idea of partnerships. It's quite common in the country as well. You buy a share, half, quarter share in an airplane, and building from there. So once you got going on this Lin 50 and you started making yourself a bit of a name for yourself in the airshow circuit, then you started pursuing maybe getting a bit of a sponsorship, help someone else pay for your flying. How did that evolve?
So yeah, one doesn't just arrive at an airshow and start flying low-level aerobatics. It's quite a different genre of flying. It requires a whole new skill set. So I was advised to enter competition aerobatics, which I did for 2 years. I had to achieve a certain level in competition aerobatics before I could get signed out to fly at an airshow. My first airshow limit was down to 700 feet, which is still pretty high. You can barely read any branding on the airplane, but that's where you have to start, and you can't rush into this sort of thing. Being an airline pilot, I couldn't afford to fly my aeroplane around for free and have a jolly whenever I wanted to. So I had to look at another way of earning income to support my bad habit of loving aerobatics, and obviously wanting to fly in air shows. Matching a sponsorship with the air shows and my aerobatics covered all those, or ticked all the boxes. And so I set about looking for a sponsorship. My first sponsor was Hooch Alcoholic Beverages, and we flew for them for 3 years. It was myself and my partner in this Lin 50 at the time. Okay. We did about 250 shows around the country in 3 years, so we were pretty busy. It was an exciting time. We flew down to the coast, we flew air shows wherever we could. Okay,
it says we're live. Sorry, folks, for those who were booted off there, the internet was a bit tricky. If you guys are back online, just type a little message there. I just want to make sure that the connection is still the same, and those who are watching live. Apologies for that a little bit. We have a bit of internet trouble at this side, both sides of this conversation. We're going to try our best and keep it going. So if it does cut off again, we'll reconnect and see if we can continue the conversation. So Brad, you said you ended up with starting off sponsorship then with Zoom Zoom, and I'm just putting the picture up of the Zoom Zoom red and black and yellow Mazda 300 extra 300.
Yeah, Alex, we started with these Lin 50, 2 ships Lin 50 formation, and we progressed into a extra 300 formation team. We were also fortunate during that time to take our team around the world to Dubai and to Japan, where we competed at the World Grand Prix of Aerobatics, which is it's a competition for airshow teams where you are measured or where you scored on the creativity part of flying. So it was an exciting time. I was with Mazda for 12 and a half years, and just sort of towards the end of that challenging part of my career with Mazda that I got into the upset prevention and recovery training side of things.
Okay, so before we climb in there, let's just share a little video clip there with the listeners. Zoom Zoom, and this is the sort of, you're flying single at the end there. I think this is a Durban airshow. There we go. Okay, so there we go. You got some of your friends and colleagues saying, "Hey, that's Brad," and talking. So, Brad, now obviously by the end of your career, Brian Eminis was mentioning something about retiring after the show. So I gather this is one of the last shows in that season for you. Coming down, I mean, you obviously got supreme control of this aeroplane. You are flying at about, looks like 2-foot cross controls. Obviously good for the branding, good for your marketing, letting the crowd see it, and also demonstrating that the pilot skills of this. So is that the sort of level of skills you need to have to be involved in the UPRT? I tell you what, let's pause this and we'll come back to the video in a minute, and let's talk about how UPRT came about. Where did you fit in? Obviously you have skills as an aerobatic pilot, and talk us through the beginning days of UPRT at South African Airways.
Okay, so due to my background with aerobatics and air shows, Captain Johnny Woods at the time was the chief pilot for South African Airways. He had a vision for the airline, obviously being involved in aerobatics himself. He had built his own pit special. He had a vision that every pilot should maintain their manual flying skills.
Okay.
I think he saw where things were in terms of with modern type aircraft, and he always felt that there's a need for pilots to keep flying small aircraft, keeping the manual flying skills going, etc. So I think his vision initially was to try and have a couple of airplanes around at South African Airways that we could all fly every now and again just to keep those manual flying skills going. but obviously that comes at a cost. So what he did was he started looking around for a sponsorship type of thing. Approached the insurance company. Our insurance company in London was kind enough to give us a risk management bursary and allow us to dedicate that to whatever field of safety we wanted to. So we nominated upset prevention recovery training as the field that we wanted to spend that money. A couple of us went over to Phoenix in Arizona to the world leaders in upset prevention recovery training, and that's Aviation Performance Solutions. Their head office is in Arizona, MESA. We attended a course there, absolutely terrific course, exceptionally high level of aerobatic upset prevention recovery training instruction. They really set the tone for our program, for the rest of our program that we developed for South African Airways. Highly professional bunch of guys. But they took us through a 5-day program which involved mainly advanced stalling, characteristics that could lead to that scenarios, teaching us how to prevent upsets, how to recognize upsets, and then obviously the skill set to recover from an upset, especially in a startle situation. That included 2 sessions in our Boeing 737 simulator. When we got back to South Africa, Captain Johnny Wood said to me, or asked me if I'd like to run with the project on behalf of SAA. It wasn't a legislated, UPRT was not legislated at the time.
Okay.
So it was really more of his foresight and seeing that this could be something that we could all benefit from. Sure. That got us going. In 2012, we started the upset training program at South African Airways. I started developing it. And obviously being primarily an Airbus operator, it had its challenges because, Airbus designed their flight control laws and protections around preventing stalls and loss of control in flight through unusual attitudes.
Sure.
We had to design a program around getting around those flight control laws and protections, yet avoiding negative training. And over 2 years, I spent a lot of time with the guys from Aviation Performance Solutions developing the program. Okay. They came out, they vetted our program. We had we joined a committee called the International Committee for Aviation Training in Extended Envelopes, which is based in the Netherlands. Okay. Attended many seminars and developed our knowledge base in order to make it an effective program, because upset prevention and recovery training is really, without the skill sets of the instructor, could lead to negative type training. Could be a dangerous form of training if it's not taught properly.
Okay, just let me pause you one sec, Brad. You mentioned a lot of things. I think we just need to take a moment. Okay, so the backdrop, sure. Johnny Woods at the time, a formidable man who had the insight, the foresight, the sort of strategic vision of where this thing could go. And obviously, I'd seen him around in the Airshow. He's very passionate about light aircraft flying too, but also high-performance airliners. So with his vision, tell me about the landscape at the time. What was the climate like globally? Airliners, I mean, I know there was a couple of major accidents that we can talk about as well, but what was happening in the airline? There's different terms that you can be used there, LOC-I, etc., the stalling, the startle factor. Just paint a bit of a scene about those days, 2010, that kind of era.
Well, the Aeroplane Upset Recovery Training Aid was written in 1998. And it was really for the industry to try to get a background and set some standards for implementing this type of training. But it wasn't really implemented. It wasn't really enforced. The airlines did not have to do it. So very few airlines took it upon themselves to train it. South African Airways actually at the time did start a little bit of upset training. The initial manual did not describe instructor methodology too well. So we had a problem of a lot of instructors doing their own thing. Okay. In 2008, they revised that manual, and in 2009 was the initial meeting or conference at the Royal Aeronautical Society by this Committee of Aviation Training in Extended Envelopes. Okay. And it just so happened on that day, Air France had their accident. Oh. And that really woke the world up to possibly the lack of manual flying skills that are becoming apparent in modern type aircraft. Sure. The industry was asking, why are the pilots not able to recover from a stall? How did we end up in that situation? And at the time at South African Airways, it wasn't a legislated things. So it was more, we recognized the fact that there were accidents happening around the world from loss of control in flight.
Sure.
And since 2001, loss of control in flight has been the leading cause of aviation accidents, or loss of life, should I say.
Okay.
So, we took the foresight to start trying to develop something that could improve the manual handling skills. And since subsequently it's become legislated, and it's become quite an important part of airline flying training.
Okay, great. So now the scene is set, and ironically enough, very sadly enough, during your meeting, the Air France 447 goes down, and that's a whole different conversation. But around the world, there is this wake up. How is it that airline pilots with thousands of hours can't recognize the stall? What is it that happens? This talk of all the sensors that happen to the individuals in the cockpit. There's noise, there's flash, there's stall warnings, there's a whole bunch of things that goes on to just make it that much trickier. And this is the startle factor that you talk about. So you go off now, Johnny Woods has set the scene, he's identified his team, you go and do your training, you bring it back, and now you've got a year, up to 2 years of work, making it an Airbus model. How do you take it forward then? What is the next step? So you've got now your 4 people, you've got your resources with APS, but it's you and your team. And how do you go about training your team, your instructors, to be able to train the pilots? What is the next steps after that?
Well, we looked at, initially it was 4 of us who went over to APS. I became the project manager, and I had to then go and find about 8 more guys who we could train over the period of the next few years using the risk management version to do it. So we opted to choose 50% of guys who had all attitude experience, who were current aerobatic pilots, who were flying in the air shows, who were seasoned competitors,
sure,
and who had a good understanding of the all attitude envelope. And we also then decided to take 50% of guys who had never really gone past 90 degrees of bank,
okay,
or should I say in the last few years of their flying career,
Okay.
That was sort of an experiment, and we sent these guys off to Aviation Performance Solutions to specifically get on aircraft training. We wanted our guys to feel what it felt like to get startled, to feel what the G-force is like, to see what it's like to try and react under these conditions, so that they could then transfer that feelings and emotions and the cognitive disability of startle to our line crew. It's obviously cost prohibitive to send all our pilots
sure,
on a on-aircraft training program because of the cost. So we had to look at doing all this training in a simulator. But a very important part of the upset training is that the instructor has had, we felt has had on-aircraft training,
okay,
and can really portray what the psychological impact of startle is going to be like to the crew, and then teach them how to mitigate the effects of startle. As you mentioned, startle is one of the big, should I say, it's one of the biggest things that has led to loss of control in-flight events.
okay,
One can never train a pilot not to have startle. So we've got to train a pilot how to deal with startle.
sure.
And that's what we really spent time working on to develop the project, in collaboration with Aviation Performance Solutions, who have got a wealth of experience in this field.
Okay, so I'm going to just put up this picture. It comes from their webpage, Aviation Performance Solutions. There you can see the extras. They've also got recently acquired some jets. That's in Phoenix, Arizona. And the bottom half there, the APS logo, there's a candidate in the simulator. You can see it's gone about 120 degrees of bank, and that's really the program. So let's pause here for a minute and actually talk about what is the experience for a line crew such as myself going into the sim, and I'm doing my first lot of upset prevention recovery training. You've trained your team, and that team is now training me. What am I expecting, and how does it play out for me in the sim? How do you create startle for me, knowing I'm going in for training?
Well, before one arrives for that sim session, there's quite a lot of background technical reading that one has to do, and a couple of exam modules, just to make sure that one understands the aerodynamics surrounding high altitude aerodynamics, properly understanding why an aeroplane stalls,
yeah,
and obviously reading a lot about the psychological effects that occur during an upset. So one would have to spend a good 10 hours of reading and obviously answering some exam questions before they came for the session.
Okay.
The simulator session is itself a 2-hour briefing where we cover aspects such as causes of aeroplane upsets, the aerodynamic principles that surround some of the upsets. We discuss a lot of the prevention in that aspects within the briefing, how to prevent, because obviously prevention is the number one thing that we're trying to achieve here. You know, we obviously want to prevent the aeroplane from going into the upsets, and then if it does end up in an undesirable aircraft state, we have to teach the pilot or give him the skill set to recover from that. So the sim session itself is based on going back to basics in a way and understanding really, especially in Airbus, the logic of the different laws and protections that are apparent in the simulator or in the Airbus.
Okay.
We then focus a lot on high altitude flying and the dangers of high altitude flying, discussing the environmental factors, the systems anomalies that could occur. We discuss a lot of the pilot-induced upsets that have occurred over the past and how the pilots could have prevented themselves from getting into that situation. And that takes a good part of an hour and a half of just studying the prevention aspects of getting into an upset.
Okay.
We then give the crew, would you like to pause there?
So let's just maybe pause and just say, well, what is an upset? For those who are watching and are not familiar with these terms, tell me what is a likely upset? You're flying over the Alps and there's a jet stream in the nearby vicinity. What does an upset look like? How does it result? What do I see in the airplane?
Well, an upset is generally defined as an unintended diversion from flight parameters normally experienced during your average operation. So anytime the airplane is diverging from what you would normally expect the airplane to do, it could be leading to an upset, or it could be in a full-blown upset. Things like high angles of bank, high pitch attitudes, low pitch attitudes, undesired speeds that are not appropriate for the flight conditions are considered upsets, such as overspeed and low speed situations with high angles of attack. We recently looked into a scenario where an aircraft had gone into an overspeed situation. The overspeed situation was caused by an environmental effect where the aircraft had lost about 50 knots of tailwind as it flew through a mountain wave over the Alps.
Okay.
This led to an overspeed situation. The overspeed led to a disconnection of the autoflight system. And obviously the crew, most crew have never really flown an aeroplane above 20,000 feet. Sure. Obviously we have restrictions about manually flying an aeroplane in RVSM airspace, etc. Most crew have never flown a simulator at 35,000 feet.
Yes.
All your handling exercises are generally done at low altitude. So having taught the crew to handle and to fly the aeroplane, the dangers of aerodynamic instability, etc., at high altitude, it was quite important. This crew identified the problem. The aeroplane neared a stall situation, and the crew were able to recognize the situation. And obviously, a massive startle effect in the flight deck. So
sure.
That's the big thing that you're going to see in an upset is obviously the crew are not used to seeing the aeroplane in this situation. The startle effect can have a pronounced effect on how you cognitively deal with the situation. Do you go into the fight or flight mode where and it could last for 30 seconds or so, where you don't have the ability to really see what's happening and to function cognitively. So much of the upset training is designed around giving a pilot something that he can, in his toolkit, that he can use to help him overcome the effects of startle so that it doesn't lead to a cognitive situation of serious cognitive deterioration,
Okay, so startle happens, and I imagine I'm sitting in the cruise. It's 40,000 feet, and I either hear lots of bells or lights, or the airplane seemingly not flying how it should be flying. That startle kicks in. What's happening to me physiology right now? What goes on then? You mentioned fight or flight. What goes on with my senses?
Okay, so basically what happens is the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that makes your calculated decisions on a day-to-day basis, and an injection of cortisol into the brain caused by the startle effect will tend to almost render your prefrontal cortex almost useless in a way.
Okay.
What happens is the brain then starts shutting down. You start losing the ability to hear. You get tunnel vision. The heart rate goes up, and we all know that the IQ goes down when the heart rate goes up. And it can almost render a person an invalid.
Sure.
A person is unable to really react like they normally would in a situation. So that's also a problem with training. Simulator training, you can only get a pilot to a certain point in terms of startle.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, you're in a simulator, and it's a pre-planned event.
Yes.
But real life startle is a major problem in upsets. And if we can teach a pilot a strategy to help him or her overcome that startle, or to prevent you from going into the fight or flight mode, it gives you the ability to continue functioning as a pilot, and to apply the correct control applications. Obviously, the strategy that I'm talking about is quite an in-depth thing. It requires quite a lot of training, and that's what we focus 2.5 hours of our initial sim training on.
Okay.
Is teaching the pilot a strategy in which he can recover. United Airlines recently did a study in 2016 on the effects of startle. They took about 20 crew, and they put them into different situations where the pilots experienced slow startle events, such as an eventual loss of fuel, to another scenario where it was quick startle events where, for instance, the guys were put into a situation of severe wake turbulence or final approach.
All right.
And they provided half the crew, during this experiment, they provided half the crew with a mnemonic to go through should they start experiencing the debilitating effects of startle.
Okay.
That mnemonic was time, attitude, and power. So what they basically had to do is, as soon as they felt that the situation was becoming overwhelming,
Yes.
they had to say the words time, think about how much time they had, what was the attitude of the aeroplane, and assess that, and then consider the power, which was basically the energy consideration of the aeroplane. They then measured the function, how did the crew function under that startle, and under the stress, and they measured that against the guys who had been given the mnemonic as a tool versus the guys who basically were given nothing as a tool in this experiment. And they found that the performance of the pilots that were given the tool of time, attitude, and power far exceeded the performance of the crew that hadn't.
Sure.
Obviously, that was as a result of being able to, during the time of startle, continue functioning as a pilot, and
Yes.
applying the correct inputs and keeping the prefrontal cortex engaged in the activity of recovering.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question then. Okay, so I've been trained, I've done all my pre-briefing, and I've done the reading, I've run the exams. Now we do our simulator briefing before going in the sim. And in the sim itself, now along the way I've learned the strategy now. So I don't know if you want to just share the strategy and how you've mentioned this tunneling, the prefrontal cortex, you've got tunneling. Actually, your senses are shutting down. Your vision is going into a smaller cone of acuity. Your hearing is just about gone. If we talk about Air France 447, they had a stall warning and oral warnings more than 70 times, which you can read up on the accident investigation. But they weren't reacting to it because it was just about their system was shut down, the vision is shut down. And how do you get out of that thing? And this is where the strategy comes in. So what is that strategy? What does a pilot do? I know you have to have specific training, but give us through a scenario of an Airbus pilot hearing noise, hearing sounds and seeing things and feeling like things are getting out of hand here, my vision's getting closed in here. What do I do? What is that strategy?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, troubleshooting the cause of any upset is secondary to initiating the actual recovery. So we teach the pilots to first get out of to recover from the situation and then fault find as to what went wrong. Secondly, the strategy incorporates, it will vary from airline to airline,
sure.
From operator to operator. But it involves firstly to recognize and confirm the situation that you're in. Recognize could be a visual recognition outside using your visual references to see has the aircraft gone into an unusual attitude. Are you sitting with an abnormally high nose attitude when you shouldn't? Yeah. Is the pitch attitude of the aircraft different to what it should be for the current configuration, etc.? One can use your instruments to recognize the situation, and we would teach the pilots how to do that. How to recognize when the speed's inappropriate. How do you recognize what the sky pointer is telling them, as an example?
Sure.
This could occur in IMC conditions. It could occur at night, so it's quite important to understand what you can see off the primary flight displays as well as being visually able to see outside. Once the situation is recognized, it obviously has to be confirmed. We had a situation many years ago with Copa Airlines operating into Colombia. That was a 737-800. They reinserted the primary flight display indicator into the aircraft. They pinched the wiring harness at the time.
Oh, dear.
And during the flight, the PFD showed a toppling of the attitude indicator. And one of the pilots disconnected the auto flight system and tried to rectify the abnormal situation and actually put the aircraft into an upset, and that led to that fatal accident. So very important in terms of confirming the situation that you're in an upset, and it's not just an instrument failure, etc. Once that's done, somebody then has to take control of the aircraft. It's very important that the person with the most situational awareness takes control of the aircraft, and we'll teach the pilot how to take control appropriately. And then obviously one has to verbalize the fact that you're in an upset or that you're in a stall situation. And that initial verbalization is what really kicks off the strategy of getting the guys into the situation where they now can see the situation for what it is and then apply the correct measured recovery technique. So there's six broad things that one needs to consider in an upset. Obviously, the most important thing is the angle of attack, because most loss of control in-flight accidents have been caused by the stall. And we all know that an aircraft is not controllable in a stall situation. So one has to get out of the stall situation in order to control the aircraft. Now, this takes us back to many years ago where the industry was asking, why are pilots not recovering from a stall situation? Why did Air France, the tragedy of Air France 447 happen? Why did the Air Asia accident happen? Why did the Buffalo accident happen? And after looking at the way that the pilots were being trained in simulators, they found that it was inappropriate. The guys were basically maintaining the pitch attitude and trying to use power or thrust to power themselves out of the stall. In 2012, they changed that worldwide. All the OEMs decided to rewrite the stall recovery technique with the emphasis on unloading the aircraft and making sure that the aircraft is not stalled before you carry on with the rest of the recovery procedure. But unfortunately, the law of primacy, which can last for up to 10 years in a pilot, once you've been taught something once one way, it takes a long time to unlearn that. One can, through targeted training, try and teach a pilot to change the way he's going to react. But it takes a very long time to unlearn the primary way that you were taught to do anything, including riding a bicycle.
Sure.
This was one of the concerns in the industry when we first started upset training, was that the wrong instructional techniques and methodology would be used. And once a pilot is trained the wrong way the first time to recover from an upset, that would stick with them for the rest of their careers. It was a big concern from Airbus. We had lots of discussions about this, which is why we decided to create a team of people that can all teach exactly the same thing. And I led that team. I was fortunate enough to lead the team and then to work with Aviation Performance Solutions in developing the correct, 100% correct methodology to make sure that we don't bring in any negative training. And I spent a tremendous amount of time teaching the team, or not teaching the team, but making sure that there's no negative transfer of training going into the program, which could easily happen. You could get a guy do something that an instructor's never seen before, but he doesn't have the skill set or the knowledge to recognize that it was an inappropriate input.
Sure.
So that's where teamwork is very important. We have to work as a team. We still work as a team. We still do oversights. And that's a very important part of upset training. So just back to the strategy, we now know that once the aircraft is unloaded and it's not stalled, it's now flyable. Okay, and so there's another 5 considerations one must take into account, and that's obviously it's the rolling of the aircraft in order to realign the lift vector in the appropriate place. And once again, all these things are strategy, part of a strategy, and we call it a strategy because it's not you don't always do the same thing.
Sure.
To unload the aircraft, how much do you unload? Do you unload a lot? Do you unload to half a G? Maybe it's just the pilot's pulling the stick back and he doesn't know he's doing it, and the unload maybe just releasing the side stick.
Sure.
So it's very important that the strategy itself is trained very, very well, and that the student has a proper understanding of how to apply the strategy. It's no use just giving a guy a mnemonic and saying, okay, you can jump into any aircraft now, just say these 4 words and everything will work out for you. You really have to have a good understanding of the strategy, and that's what takes up most of our focus of our upset training, and especially our recurrent training, is making sure that the pilots constantly understand how to apply a strategy in order to enable them to function after the startle effect has taken place.
Sure. Okay.
So I have covered quite a lot there. But, essentially, once we've used the strategy to recover, it's not over then.
Yeah.
We had a situation with Air France 471 where they went into an upset and the autopilot disengaged, and they ended up in another upset because nobody re-engaged the autopilot. So once the upset has taken place and the recovery has taken place, one has to then still make sure that the aircraft gets put into a situation where it's flying, the automatics are possibly back in if it's appropriate, and making sure that the configuration of the aircraft is what you need for the condition.
Sure. Now, okay, you've given us a lot of information, and I can see, Brad, that you're passionate about this. I know this is something you've dived in for nearly a decade now, and actually put the aerobatics and airshow flying aside, and this has become your main focus, and it's wonderful to have a passionate person in charge of a project like this. I'm very curious, though. Okay, so we're going to dive back in, but you talked about your team and how you divided them up, almost like a case study in current aerobatic guys and non-aerobatic guys. How did that play out? A year down the line, or doing your evaluation of your team later, the 50-50 split, would you continue 50-50? Does it matter if you have airshow background or not?
Look, it's obviously beneficial to have an all-attitude background. That obviously speaks for itself as to why. But a properly trained instructor, and in the industry, you're simply not going to have enough aerobatic guys out there who are involved in a company's training program, possibly. So we had to do this experiment to see what the result would be. And I must say that the guys that had never done air shows and aerobatics performed just as well as the other guys, provided that that they're trained properly. These guys spent 26 hours in a simulator. Okay. They spent many, many, many hours in a classroom with me. And they obviously went through the Aviation Performance Solutions, the APS on aircraft training, which is an absolutely integral part of the whole program. So they became a well-rounded group of guys with a really good knowledge base on which to work from, and they've done a fantastic job.
Okay, let's just jump back into the simulator for a minute there now. So we've discussed what upsets are, how it would look like. You got the high level, you got low level. It's essentially any place the airplane is now that it shouldn't be for the conditions that it's in. In other words, you don't want to be on final approach either too fast or too slow. You don't want to have too much bank in a configured situation. You don't want to have flaps out at a cruise of 40,000 feet. All those different scenarios with the conditions you're in now. Should this airplane be in this energy state, etc.? That's kind of a very loose summary. Would you buy that of what an upset is?
Yeah, I would say yes. I would. Prevention is obviously the number one thing that we want to enforce to make sure that we can recognize environmental conditions that may occur, which could lead the aircraft into the situation that you're talking about. So, For instance, flying around thunderstorms where we're sucking up warm air masses. These big airplanes that fly intercontinental, it's very critical. For instance, the stall angle of attack only has to be changed by about 4 degrees at high altitude to go into a full stall. So the angle of attack change of 4 degrees could put the aircraft into a stall. And with the maneuvering stability at high altitude, it's a very small input on the side stick or in the control column to do that, and that could be caused by startle. You could have a pilot who is just a little bit too quick on trying to sort the situation out and actually puts the aircraft into an upset. So a lot of the training is focused on trying to recognize situations that could lead to the upset. But once you, back to your question, once you in this undesired aircraft state, the aircraft leading into an undesired aircraft state, the question is, do you leave the autopilot engaged or do you take over flying manually? And that's a whole subject on its own. There are many situations where the OEMs would advocate leaving the automatics engaged. But now, in a situation where the airplane is not doing what it should do, as Airbus' fourth law, golden rule says, if it's not doing what it needs to do, take over manually. So the guys have to have that skill set so that when they do take over manually, they're able to then recover from the situation.
Okay.
Obviously, due to the incredible amount of automation going into aircraft these days and the overwhelming amount of technological advances in our current modern aircraft, it's a very unnatural environment for a person to be. And in an overwhelming situation, that could just be the thing that overwhelms a pilot enough to render them in that situation of fight or flight. So, we've got to teach a pilot how to function in these scenarios. And obviously, with the degradation of manual flying skills becoming apparent, even Airbus has changed the new way that they train Airbus 350 training, in that the pilots spend the first part of their conversion flying the aircraft manually. Sure. Whereas it used to be the opposite way around, where the guys would spend a lot of time on automation in the beginning, learning all the intricacies of the automatics and the flight management system before actually flying the aircraft. Sure. Airbus have realized, we need to keep these guys' manual flying skills up, and we need to get them flying manually first before we introduce the technology of the flight management systems, etc.
Okay, great. Now, so you in the training, the candidates are being trained, and you go through all the prevention, but also obviously to learn how to get out of these upset positions. The training is received very well, and at the end of it, you go back to the classroom and there's a debrief. So talk us through what the debrief will be looking like, or even after each little event, and how you equip the pilot to say, well, you see this, how do we improve that for the next time? What does your debrief look like in the upset training, prevention training, recovery training?
Well, the actual during the session, there's a lot of limitations on a simulator in terms of fidelity. A flight tested data module, which incorporates what the aeroplane should actually do in terms of what you're doing in the simulator on a day, exercise to exercise basis. But we sometimes, okay, back to the question. A lot of the training, the way we do it at South African Airways, is we have instructor-led exercises, because a lot of the exercises that the student's going to see he hasn't ever seen before. Very few guys have spent a lot of time past 90 degrees of bank or in high nose-up attitudes, especially if they've been in an airline for many, many years. It might have been a long time since they've done that in a light aircraft. Okay. So a lot of the training is instructor-led, and it's a building block process on firstly understanding the prevention side of things, and then it's a building block process onto giving them the skill set, so that at the end of the sim session they are able to confidently recognize, confirm, and then recover from the upset. That means that the instructor sits in the seat, and he flies the aeroplane into the upset, and he pauses and he runs through everything that the pilot's going to be seeing, what he's going to be feeling, the effects of the startle, what his general reaction might be if he's startled, and what it should be, what it shouldn't be. And so he's going to lead the student through this process, and it's a building block process, as I said. Mm-hmm. And after each maneuver, there's a debrief. So we would fly, as an example, a nose low over bank situation, and the instructor would demonstrate the recovery technique there, for example, using the strategy, pause the simulator afterwards, discuss what he did, how did the student feel, what did the student see, and then slowly let the student get used to that attitude and start learning how to recover from that attitude. It takes time, but it's a building block process, and it's quite an intense session for the pilots, because there's a lot of learning that takes place. It's an intense session for the instructors, because there's a lot of teaching and patterning that takes place. It's not just your usual type sim session sitting in the back watching the crew go through a line-orientated evaluation,
Sure.
And then by the time we get to the debriefing, the guys, we've rectified a lot of the mistakes that the guys would have made. We've tried to build some new, a new skill set for them. And we'll just spend a bit of time discussing this, and then what they need to do to prepare for maybe the recurrency session that will take place in 6 months to a year's time.
Okay, well, that's great. Yeah, that's a nice, thorough explanation of it. I like that. I mean, there's a nice, thorough preparation beforehand. You go into it with a mindset of learning, with giving of your best, and each little step along the way, review, improve, and then at the end, a nice, solid debrief to put the whole picture together and put it to bed, as it were, for that 6 months. So the difference between the initial training that you've done, where we brought it into the airline all those years ago with bringing in UPRT on the 2 different Airbus Boeing fleets, and the recurrent training, how does that play out with you and your instructor team?
Well, obviously cost is a factor, so we've had to work out, are we going to keep a dedicated simulator session for upset training, or are we going to try build it into our recurrent training plans? We've been fortunate enough that we've been able to use upset training in conjunction with other types of training like RNAV and EDTO training. So the guys have still managed to get at least 2 hours a year of UPRT as part of their recurrency. Part of the recurrency, what we do is we just generally try to focus on reinforcing the strategy. We go through all the prevention aspects again. It's pretty much a 2-hour briefing to kick off with, looking at the newer developments within upset prevention recovery training. Within the last 5 years, 10 of the 25 worst accidents have been through loss of control. So there's always something to learn. Sure. As to why the crew did what they did and how they ended up in that situation. So we spend a lot of time in our recurrent training discussing that. And then it's just reinforcing what we had taught them in the initial training. What we do find, though, is that there's obviously not a lot of retention of all the facts that we give them in the initial lesson. So the students generally tend to find a recurrent training session almost like a new learning experience again, sure. But it's reinforcing something that they'd learned before. It's trying to avoid getting into the situation where the law of primacy will take over and you start doing the wrong things. And if you do the right things long enough, hopefully that's what will be applied in a situation of startle, We also find that the confidence of the guys is much, much better in the recurrent training than what it was during the initial, because it's not so new anymore. And we find the skill set just amazing. The guys are able to recover from all the upsets. Within 2 hours, we've covered what we would have in a 4-hour session as part of the initial. So we're able to cover a lot more in recurrent training. And you just see, by the time we get to our third or fourth recurrent training cycle, through the use of the Aviation Performance Solutions, the APS methodology of training, you could just see these guys' skill sets have improved so much over years, and it's shown itself in real life too. Okay,
I was going to ask you that. Do you have any, is there any real success stories out there that people can say, look, UPRT training and airliners has saved the day?
Yeah, Alex, there has been. There's still a few investigations going on to the most recent ones. To just finalising the reports between many of the authorities that are involved. Sure. But since we started this upset training stories, it's definitely a worthwhile training program to put into, be it general aviation, corporate or airline type training. I feel every pilot should do this training at some point in their career. Unfortunately, it's becoming legislated. I think at the commercial pilot level now. In the beginning, we found that the average pilot has only to fully stall an aircraft once in his entire aviation career. Sure. The FAA recommends that the pilot fully stalls the airplane in his PPL. Thereafter, it's all approach to stall training, and which wasn't really being taught properly in the first place. So we find now the skill sets are better. It's been an awesome learning curve for a lot of pilots. Many guys have come out of it saying that it's the best training they've ever received.
Okay.
But once again, I must just emphasize, as long as it's being done properly, and that's the most important thing. That's a challenge for the industry, is to make sure that we've got properly qualified instructors giving the training. Those sure. Instructors have to be properly trained. That's all. Most instructors can do it. It's just being able to provide the training correctly and being able to make sure that students. There's no bad habits creeping in,
sure.
etc. And that all comes down to instructor training.
Okay, Brad, I just want to say you mentioned we broke up a little bit, but if I understood what you got through the garbled technical, you said that there are some success stories. They are under current investigations and they're not published, so we're not going to talk about them. But the short answer is yes, UPRT is working, and to be continued conversation about the success stories, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Alex. I think it'll give us, maybe in about 6 months' time, we'll have a finalized version of a couple of the events that have occurred around the world. I've been involved with United Airlines training. I've been involved with Delta Airlines training and obviously South African Airways training. And since we started those training programs, there's been a lot that's happened, or a lot of lessons learned in the industry. And I think we can talk more about those in a few months' time. It'll be a good opportunity to get together and speak again.
Sure. Okay. And just I'm going to take some of the questions that have come through. Franco was asking earlier, and I know this was a very sensitive thing, but in terms of the 737 MAX and those controllability, is UPRT feature, or is this something we don't want to discuss for today?
Well, one of the instructors at APS, at Aviation Performance Solutions, he's the ex-chief pilot, chief test pilot for Boeing.
Okay.
And I had a chat to him, and we discussed, would the application of a specific strategy in both of those situations have helped the pilots, and we believe it would have. There was a lot of startle in both those situations. The guys rotated with the stick shaker going, unaware of why it was going. Was it a stall? Wasn't it a stall? What was actually going on? And then had to try and function with the stick shaker going off. They obviously had massive startle in the cockpit.
Sure.
And from the reports, it looks like we all know the shortcomings of the MAX, and the fact that the pilots didn't really know much about the MCAS system. So there was a lot of surprise in those situations. But the energy of those aircraft got away slightly from the pilots. The thrust wasn't brought back out of the takeoff thrust setting. And as the aircraft accelerated, the aircraft became more and more uncontrollable. So
Sure.
if they had to, in a perfect world, apply the strategy and control the energy of the aircraft, which is part of teaching the strategy and learning the strategy, controlling the energy of the aircraft, we believe that we may have had a different outcome.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear.
So I would say the UPRT definitely could have helped in.
Yeah,
possibly played a part in this.
That's great. Okay, so we are going to continue a more evolved discussion on specifics, hopefully in a few months' time. It'll be great to have that follow-up feedback. We got some people saying great discussion and enjoying the content. Brad, another question. Behind you, you've got a picture of the Wright brothers. Jock wants to know, what is the meaning behind the photo sitting behind you?
Well, this is on my dining room wall, and it was there's a little plaque at the bottom which just celebrates the 100th anniversary of flight. It was an amazing day when we celebrated that 100th anniversary of flight, and I thought perfect. In fact, it was bought by a friend of mine as a birthday gift, to hang up on my wall here. But every time I walk past it, one has to just go back to remember why we're in this game, because we just love flying,
That's it. From the young boy flying RCs, sitting at air shows, watching those formation aerobatic teams, to being part of those aerobatic teams. Brad, it's been a wonderful conversation with you. Ati had mentioned a comment now. Ati Niemann from 43 Air School said there's lots of opportunity at ab initio training. So certainly continue doing what you're doing. It's wonderful that you've got such passionate people that have the skills and are able to share and build their teams in order that the industry can learn out of this. And what you're doing with upset prevention recovery training through South African Airways in association with the APS, it's great. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to catching up with you sometime in the future.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to all the viewers. And, there are going to be a lot of guys out there who are asking the question of how do you go about getting this upset training. And we are working together with our local CAA. The Civil Aviation Authority has been very proactive in trying to make sure that this is done properly. So there's a lot of correspondence at the moment as to how to get this implemented properly, especially at places like 43 Air School, put into a curriculum, and just watch the space, and we hope to move forward with this as soon as possible.
That'd be great. Take care and be safe. Thanks again, Brad. All the best.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining the show. It's been wonderful. Please, if you wouldn't mind to subscribe, like, share, get the message out there. We're trying to keep this show up and running. And until next time, stay safe.